Okay, I wanted to provide you with a brief overview of the mass media in terms of operation. So let me get started. You have to understand, first of all, that the United States mass media is based on the same capitalist model that every other business is based on. So nothing is owned by the government and used by the government to perpetuate propaganda or anything like this. They all report the news to us from the government, but they are the independent branch of journalism, at least in theory. Now, because we're in a capitalist model, what you need to understand is that the events that make it on the news are not a reflection of what people are interested in or what people most need to be informed about or what improves their ability to be good citizens or anything like that. It's the exact same element that sells reality TV shows or championship wrestling or any other program. It is the objective to get the largest audience share possible by whatever means necessary. So that means if you run a news organization, you live and die based on advertising revenue. You don't get paid any money from anywhere else. Your sole source of revenue is advertising. So you can only charge advertisers as much as your audience share reflects. And there are companies who track audience share as a business and provide this information so that we know roughly who's watching what, where, and when. So, from this capitalist model, you want to sell as much advertising as possible in order to maximize the return, which means you have to have the largest audience share possible. If you have to have the largest audience share, how do you get that? Well, you put on the most exciting, sensational, scandalous, and just downright crude stories that you can find, whatever appeals to the lowest common denominator in society, including those types of shows that, by the way, this isn't only aimed at what we might call the lowbrow television watching crowd, the Honey Boo Boo show watching, but the thing is, I actually think that that's a myth because I think more people who at least appear normal, the way that most of us do, probably enjoy that show or shows like it because they probably look at it and it's so bizarre to them and it's such a relief to them that they aren't that way and it's such a spectacle. You get the idea. So you want to get the largest audience that you possibly can. And the way to do that is through sensationalism, etc. That's what the problem is with news. So if you wind the clock back about 60 years in this country, you could look at a broadcaster by the name of Walter Cronkite. And I'll provide a link in the video so you can see a sample. And the idea that you would be personally invested in the news in some way, or that you would be driving an agenda of your own or of a political perspective, is just completely absent. So I think with the loss of Walter Cronkite was really the loss of decent journalism. And people will make arguments for the Dan Rather, Peter Jennings group there, but I think they've done plenty to discredit themselves. I don't think anyone comes near the credibility of a Walter Cronkite. He was just someone who was respected by everyone and considered the face of the news. And there weren't competing networks that were bad-mouthing him and trying to make him look political and running him into the ground with the politics, etc. And so it really isn't until we started to see the same thing that drives every other industry. Competition. Once upon a time, we had channels 3, 5, and 9, CBS, ABC, and NBC. That was it. And then came cable. And then came cable news with CNN. 24-hour news cycle. This was a weird thing. Who would want to watch news to begin with, let alone 24 hours a day? This is what we were thinking when CNN started. And It was difficult for them to run a 24-hour news cycle. You were repeating stuff all the time, and they struggled with that. There just wasn't enough news to tell. So how did they evolve to embrace that model? What they did was they told shorter stories more often. So you didn't necessarily need 24 hours of never-ending news. You could take a piece of news or a piece of sensational videotape and run it over and over and over and over 24 hours a day. You could do that for weeks and people would watch it. People would stop what they were doing, especially if you had something shocking. We just wrapped up a trial in Minneapolis because of thanks to sensational journalism. Well, thanks to the person, I should say, who captured the video. The only thing we probably have to thank for the journalist are the riots that the country endured last year because of the way that it was argued about in the media. And I'm speaking to both sides. So that's a little bit about the way that the media operates in the United States. I want to leave it there. I don't want to go into a lot of specific detail because, quite honestly, if I do, no matter how hard I try to sound neutral, it will inevitably begin to take on a political shape. And so I'd rather leave it in the broad perspective so that you have a fundamental idea of how everything works, and then you can draw your own conclusions from there. So that's a little bit about how everything is working and how the gears are turning. So you can apply that to a lot of the concepts we've talked about this year. And the idea is that I want you to retain your original perspective, your fundamental thinking. There is a certain amount of intuitive sense that goes into this. So you grew up with media. You know it intimately. Keep that part of it. Keep that intimate knowledge of it. But try to add to it this much broader perspective of how the thing is actually functioning so that when you end up with a product in front of you, it's not there for quite the reason that you might think it be. All I want to do is try to give you the apparatus around it so that you can have a macro view of how mass media operates and functions, and that you can form your own opinions and sort of fill in the blanks based on a combination of what I give you and what you were allowed to keep, we'll say. I hope that you've found great value in that, and if you've found some value in that, then I think if you give it some time, it'll come together for you. So I'm going to stop there. I've definitely talked long enough, so I will catch you next time.